Who's your role model and why?
Oh, now or in
Whenever,
general, like so now I have business role models.
earlier, now, whatever you want.
Yeah, now I look for people who have a life for that I like to live, and but I'll share with you this story. So, in one of my earliest seasons doing luge, Mark, my doubles partner, and I, we it was the final race of the year. We were in Eagles, Austria, which is on the mountains north of Innsbruck, and it was the World Cup finale, and Hans-Jörg Raffel of Italy and Norbert Huber, or sorry, Hans-Jörg Raffel and Norbert Huber of Italy were competing against Stefan Kraus and Jan Berendt of. They were East Germans, but then they were Germans at the time. And Raffel Huber were coming down for their. It was going to be their 8th overall World Cup title, and these guys were our idols. And and this is going to actually double up and for our what's the best advice that I ever got question as well. So we were looking for a 6th place finish. I think it was we were going to be a top a 6th place result, and we were that was going to be a good finish for us. And we were still juniors, I think. And we came down off the second to last curve, and we had a great run going, and we flipped off of curve 13, and we went through the finish curve on our face, and we went up the outrun and slid back to the bottom. And they had to put a hold on the track. We do the walk of shame up to the finish hut, and that just sucks. And I remember because it was a beautiful day in Innsbruck. It was sunny and beautiful, and it's just the view was amazing. And so we get into the finish hut, and the race is still going. Restarts still going, and we can hear over the loudspeaker. And Raffel Huber of Italy come down, and they beat the Germans for their 8th title. And we're peeling off our clothes, and we're excited for them. Like they're our idols. We wanted them. We really liked them. We didn't communicate with them very much then because we were just like the young Americans, right? And so they come in the finish hut after they check their sled and get weighed, and they're getting changed. And Raffel looks at us and he goes, "How did it go?" And we were like, "Oh my God, he knows us. He knows who we are." And we said, "Oh, we crashed off of 13." And he goes, "Okay." He goes, "I have watched you all season, and he goes, you guys are very good." And he goes, "But here's the problem." He goes, "You will go home to Lake Placid or wherever, and you will look to the other Americans." And so at the other time, there was 2 senior teams, and we were the junior team, and we were already beating them. And he goes, "The problem with the Americans is that they just look to beat each other." He goes, "Steve looks at Wendell, and Wendell looks at Bill, and Joe looks at." He goes, "They only look at each other." He goes, "When you go home," he goes, "you look to us." And I was like, I get goosebumps now thinking about that, right? He goes, "You look to us, because when you look to us," he goes, "eventually you will beat us. And then being the best in the United States will take care of itself." And I was just like, holy smokes. I hope I never forget this. Right. And I never have. 25 years later, I'm still talking about it because it was the best advice ever. So I think the role models I have are always the best example of what you are trying to become. Right. You've got to find that. And it doesn't. And it can change. Um, One thing that I'll add to this in terms of role models is it is perfectly okay to have a role model who is good in one trait, but maybe not the other. Um, I did a talk at a school, and I had made reference to an athlete, and I can't remember who the athlete was now, but um, I admired this athlete for their athletic ability and their performance. And I think at the time that athlete had been, I don't know, arrested for like drunk driving or something like that. And so what I tell athletes now is that find whatever role model you want for the thing that you admire them for, and discard the rest. And because a lot of people go like that mom was like, "I would never let my kid like watch that athlete and I told her, I said, "You're missing the point, because your athlete may need that example, but you can discard the other stuff." And we're now, especially in the United States, we're so quick now to just like destroy people based on one bad experience or something that they've done, and then we forget all the rest. And I think that's unfortunate. So your role models can change, and you can pick what you want. It's totally allowed.
So you mold your own role model out of many people.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Mr. Potato Head doll. You remember those? It's like you pick what you want and discard the rest, because eventually that's what you want to be, right? You want to be the best example. Um, uh, I think the mistake people make is when they think like, oh, if they see an athlete who, maybe has something, bad go on in their life, and they then therefore think that their athlete is going to have that same trait. And that's not true,
Mm.
right? Like, I just think it's okay to pick what you want and leave the rest. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not the only one. That answer has come up before.
Really?
That people, yeah, they look at one particular trait they admire in one person, and then another trait that they admire
For
in another
sure.
person, and they kind of make their own role model out of that.
Cool. Yeah.
So best advice you received, you just named it. Second best advice then.
Second best was the highs aren't so high and the lows aren't so low. I think the best advice now that I give to people is that you're stronger than you know. I'm working on a book, another book called You've Got This, Here's How. Because what do we tell people when they're going through something tough? We say, "You've got this," right? You've got this, right? It doesn't. We might not even know what they're fully going through, but if just as a nice gesture, we'll say, "You've got this." But I got kind of fascinated with well, what does that really mean, and can you apply that to everybody? Because my story as an Olympian, like dressed in spandex, going 140 kilometers an hour, is we don't always relate. But what I like to know is like, well, what are the parts and pieces? And so I started researching, basically, this idea of overcoming any challenge. And I got really fascinated by people who had spontaneous remissions for cancer and other diseases and things like that. And really, what we've all done through sport, through simple games we played when we were young, it's the same recipe for success no matter what it is you pick. And so I tell people, like, no matter what you're going through, you have the ability to fix it, to change it. We have in the US now, especially, there's a lot of talk about mental health, and there was an article. I actually did a podcast episode a couple days ago on this. I think we're doing athletes a disservice by painting them with a brush that if they have some sort of like depressive thoughts, or if they're struggling or something, that they have an illness. Because I don't believe that at all. Especially in the United States, where pharmaceuticals, the pharmaceutical industry is so crazy. And I know all my European friends agree. They're like, "Oh my God, it's nuts." And it is nuts, because this article came out saying that like 50% of all youth athletes struggle with depression. And I thought about it, I'm like, they probably just need a nap. They probably need a break. They probably need to balance what it is they're doing with something else. And no one's taught them how to recognize that and how to manage that. They don't have an illness and now then therefore need like medication. Because that's what an illness kind of means. It's like, oh, I have an illness, I'm going to go to the pharmacy and I'm going to get something to take and fix it. And so I think we're doing a disservice like that. So I want people to know that, with athletes in particular, when I learned how to do luge, like, you don't jump right to the top of the mountain, right? And go 140K from the start. No, you start like halfway down the track, and you get the swing of it, and then you move up a little bit as you're comfortable with the speed and the demands. And if you're not comfortable with the speed and the demands, well, you either quit, or you have to back off. You have to back off a little bit and then come back at it. And that's what every athlete I know does, right? In tennis, we start with the green ball and the orange ball, and then we finally get to the yellow ball, right? But in life, we tend to go, oh, you've gotten to here and you're struggling. Oh, you've got depression. No, no,
Hmm.
no, you got to back off a little bit and then come back at it. Right. And so I want people to know that they're more powerful than what they know. And they've got more tools at their disposal than they think they do. And if they want that thing bad enough, um, that they can find the way to make it happen. Because most likely, Christian, you know this, somebody somewhere who's worse off has made it. Right. And so as much as we do long-term athlete development models and things like that, there's Novak Djokovic learning how to play tennis in an empty pool somewhere, right? Like, right. Right now in golf, for anybody out there who's a golfer, right? We all saw Tiger Woods win the Masters, but a lot of people don't know that Tony Finau, who finished like second, started playing golf in his basement with 75-cent golf clubs, right? His dad was from Tonga, didn't know much about golf, right? Or he did a little bit, but he had a mattress in their basement, and Tony Finau and his brother hit balls with these like 75-cent golf clubs. Um, and then when they finally got out of the house, they realized they could actually hit pretty well. So I love those stories. Like we tend to focus so much. We have the role models, but the role models can also steer you in the wrong direction. They can give you the wrong idea of what it takes to be successful. Because as much as I want people to look for good role models, I also want people to find the role model of somebody who's made it, who has it worse off than them,
Yeah.
right? Because that's really where we learn the best lessons, right? And that's where you get well, if he did it or she did it, I can do it. Whereas sometimes if you look at like I saw an article years ago, everybody talks about the top 100 soccer players in the world, right? And they compare, oh well, that they all learned they played futsal and they came from South America or whatever, like. But I saw this article saying like it's really unfair to compare yourself to an outlier. And so in the world of football, like where a billion people play, looking at the top 100 may be unfair, right? If you were that 13-year-old kid who started playing when you're 11, right? Or you're that 17-year-old kid who started playing when, I like to help those athletes. I like to really encourage those athletes to go like, if you have a belief, if you've been gifted with this idea that you should be a Olympian in this sport or another sport, that's fallen on you for a reason, and it's your job to figure out how to make that happen. And I think more athletes give up way sooner than they probably should, because they just feel like they fall outside of some sort of box, right? So,
Hmm. Okay.
is that I'm not sure if I
No, no,
believe
no,
that
no.
okay, or is that
No, 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 no. I really like that. Especially the one comparing yourself to an outlier, because the people we see, you mentioned that before, technical, tactical, physical, and so on, they most likely have a higher capacity in one or many of these areas, and they are special. So I think for the normal gifted people, then yeah, it's unfair to compare yourself to an outlier. And actually, just one of the last interviews that I published with Theo Bosse, one of the most successful track cyclists,
yeah.
he also said, when I asked him, what do you think makes you successful? He said, I have good genes. I am explosive and I have good stamina. And then he said, and I love sport and I like training and so on and so on. But he acknowledged the fact that he is also genetically gifted.
And that's and I believe that 100%. And I'm curious, did he mention like what he felt when he was younger? Like he wasn't learning how to cycle and go, oh, I've got good genes. Like he was just driven,
Yeah.
right? And so I think what happens is that the driven part allows you to express those genes.
Hmm.
And so, because for every world champion, there's depending on the sport, hundreds, thousands, millions of other athletes who are decent, right? And because every team needs to have the good, the middle, and the bad, right? So and I think what I fight for is the athlete who is, and the family who has an athlete who has this dream, right? And they're trying to find a way to make that work. But then they see that guy with the good genes and they go, oh, I can never compete with that. Well, if you give up now, yes, you're never going to compete with that. But you also may find out that those genes in you are actually just they're not triggered right now, and you can, it's like looking at Michael Phelps and people are going like, oh, well, his feet are this big and his arms are this long. And I'm not like that. And there's still 6,000 swimmers at our local swim meet in Calgary here. So it's important because I think you can really derail an athlete with the gene idea. But as scientists and things, that's what science does. They're like, we just want to fit our athletes into this little box. And we want them to know, like, oh, when they're 14 and a half years old and, their arms are this long, like they're going to be okay. Like, yeah, we can do that as much as we want. Especially when there's money tied to it, when countries are throwing money at it, then we have that science. Oh, well, why do they go to the coach, right? Why do you believe in this athlete? They don't fit that box. They're too short. They're too fat. They're too this, too that. Right. But what does the coach have to do at that point? Coach has to go, I'm either going to trust my instinct or I'm going to believe in these numbers. And that's where we lose the art of coaching, right? That's where we lose the art of coaching, and we lose belief. And so I hope desperately that we don't lose that too much, or else we'll just be little robots playing on the fields, right? So.
Nice. Especially on the number type, I wanted to come back. I recently attended a conference, and one of the data scientists said the only purpose of collecting data is to support an informed decision. So it's not the decision in itself, it's to support an informed decision.
I would hug that man.
Yeah.
Because I was part of Luge Canada. I was on their board when before, like in 2006, before the Vancouver Olympics in 2010, right? And they had owned the podium. And so the government was going to throw all this money and they were going to figure out. And so every sport basically had to say, like, why do you need money? Like, why should you get this money? And they had all these different criteria. And I was just like, oh, because your mind immediately goes to the athlete who's on the bubble, right? Who you believe in, and you believe in their drive. And I think every coach would rather coach the kid who has drive than the kid who is naturally gifted and has no drive. I think every coach would agree with that, because every coach hopes to God that the kid who has the gift gets the drive, right? Because the kid who has the drive, you're patiently waiting for the gift to come, right? They're going to create it. And so it's a tough balance, but I believe in the underdog, right? We all love those stories. I believe that those underdog athletes that make it come back to sport and make sport better, and help us get the lessons we want out of sport. We want athletes to learn resiliency, hard work, goal setting, overcome any challenge. We want that. So that's why I think it's crazy when we start blaming sport on, our kids are depressed, right? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. So,
back in the days, how did a typical training day look like?
Oh, so I lived in Lake Placid, New York. I moved to Lake Placid. When I was on the national team, we could live in the training center, but sometimes living in the training center wasn't all that great. So a lot of us got an apartment, and we'd wake up in the morning. I'd like to take a dip in the lake if I could, to get some cold on my body. I didn't know at the time that was really good for me, but we would then go have a little breakfast and then go to the ice house to train our starts. So working on our most sport specific thing in the off season. And we would do that for about an hour and a half. And then we'd go to the training center and have breakfast, and we'd be able to ride our bike to all these things. It was that close. And but not like Netherlands biking. This is like American athlete biking, so it was really close. Um, so we'd have breakfast, and then we'd hit the weight room, and then we'd come back and we'd have lunch, and then we'd probably take a nap. I was a big napper. I love naps. I'm a big fan of naps. I think for some athletes, they could really benefit from having that down cycle after lunch in the middle of the day and getting some sleep. In the afternoon, we would have another, usually like um, I want to call it like it was either a game of soccer or, something uh, strength and conditioning wise, but also kind of multi-directional. Um, and then the afternoon was mostly spent on sled tech, like prepping our sleds, getting them ready to be painted, all the stuff that needed to happen in the off season. And then we'd have dinner and we would be done. But like most athletes, when you're young and you party and probably drink too much, and in Lake Placid there was a bar called the Laughing Loon, and every Tuesday, and this is a critical part of our training, Christian, I just want you to know this. They would have what was called Tankard Tuesday. So you could bring your own mug and they would fill it for like, I think it was like a quarter. So we would have chicken wings and beer, and we would party and we'd have a good time. We wouldn't sleep enough, and we'd get up in the morning and we'd do it all again. So that was a typical training day, not the beer and wings thing every night, but I look back on that and I wish that the one thing I had done better was understood more about my body and the gift that you're given when you're young, your ability to recover, your ability to compete on not a lot of sleep. And I wish I had more of an understanding, and this is what I teach now, but I wish I had more of an understanding of what my body was doing, the feelings I was having, the feeling of we used to call them butterflies, but nervous, that light anxiety, that heavy anxiety, and how to manage that. Because I think a lot of athletes waste that a lot. And if you took that energy that you're wasting on digestion and stress, and channel that more into your training, I mean, I think most athletes are just, they're hurting themselves in so many ways. But if we were just, I don't know, depending on the culture of the sport you're in, I think that shifts that a lot. I think if you're in a team environment all the time, well, now you have that social aspect that if you're not part of it, you are antisocial, and then that comes with a whole lot of stigma. There's still, in some ways, there's like hazing. We call it hazing in the U.S., right? There's just that social part of the team that you're supposed to be part of, but I think as a whole, it can wear everybody down. So that was a typical train day. Once we competed, I mean, we're going through Europe. It's like you're getting up in the morning, you're going to the track, you're taking 3 training runs, you're coming back home, you're getting undressed, you're having lunch, you're getting dressed, you're going back out to the track, another 3 runs, coming back, getting undressed, getting dressed in stuff to go to the gym, doing some weight sessions or some gym sessions, getting undressed, going back home, getting dressed again to go have some dinner, getting undressed, getting ready for sled work and video prep and doing it all over again. So I think I counted one day in luge, we got dressed and undressed like 18 times in a day. It's ridiculous.
Do you want to nominate someone to be interviewed?
Yes, Josh Perry. Just because I think in the world of sport, we now have this discussion of brain injury, brain health. There's a gentleman, I can't connect you with him, but I would love to hear I'm trying to get him too, but I would love to hear him talk. His name's Dr. Daniel Amen. And he's a brain expert here in the US. But Josh Perry, just because he was an elite BMX rider, stunts, tricks, things like that. Gifted from Massachusetts, one of the best in the world, but was developing just some symptoms. And I think a lot of athletes, one of the things that happens to us is that when we go to a doctor for any case, they immediately think that you're healthy. You're physically fit. Like, what could be wrong with you? That sort of thing. And Josh eventually got diagnosed with a massive brain tumor, and then actually went back to compete again. And so, but he's very much he's basically not cured himself, but through the use of ketogenic diets. He can talk about that, and I think that's a fascinating discussion in the world of sport now. I mean, I grew up in the generation where it was like carbo load, carbo load, carbo load, even though we were power athletes, and I think now, because of the internet and science and technology, we're learning so much. So I think Josh would be a great interview. He's a great guy, and I can give you an email for him for sure. That's yeah, I would start there. But there's 1,000 others, Christian. I could recommend to you.
I wouldn't mind speaking to George Huckle though.
I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do.
So he must
No,
be. Does he speak English?
he does.
Okay.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Like it's functional. Like
Probably easier for me to understand than the Bavarian German.
yeah, exactly. Like exactly. Like yeah, when you hear those guys speaking, getting in their tongues, like wow. Like, I tried to learn German. I mean, I learned a fair bit. I could converse and get around, but man, when those guys are sitting around a table at the end of a race and they're just chatting, and the Italians too,
Yeah.
holy smokes. Yeah, it's not good. That Südtirol is it's not pretty.
I believe that. Today I listened to one of your podcasts, and I
Oh my God, which one?
The one you recommended with the OCD person.
Oh yeah. Justin
So,
Kluski.
and one thing that many things I remember, but one thing I remember is you said you struggled to make a transition from athlete life to business life.
Yes. Yes.
Take us through that struggle, and then also let me know what are you doing business wise at this moment in time.
So I think a lot of athletes. I can only speak for North American athletes, because a lot of the European athletes that I knew from luge, like the Italians and the Germans, they were policemen, or they were forester. Like all the Italian guys were part of the forestier. I can't remember what they call it. Anyway, so so in North America, we have this struggle when you become a competitive athlete, because the American education system is pervasive. There's this, and growing up where I grew up in Boston, it's the largest concentration of universities in the world. So there's this struggle between, like, okay, when are you going to grow up and get a real job, right? And so if you're not competing in a sport that's collegiate based, like if you're a swimmer, you can get your education, you can compete for university. With luge, I had to leave school. And so I completed high school, and I was, because of my lacrosse experience, I was a Division I recruit. I was going to go to the University of Notre Dame to play lacrosse, but I decided never to go back. I decided not to go back. But growing up in New England, all I really knew about the world and making money was you had to get a degree in something and then go on in that career. Now, I was interested in athletic training. I was interested in physical therapy. I didn't feel like I was smart enough to become a doctor. I didn't have that affinity for schooling. And I think, there's people like this. They're good in a school environment, and then there's others that just need more practical doing of the thing. So when I left sport, the first time I left sport was 1996. I wasn't sure what to do, really. I got a job in sales. I was working for a company that helps high school football teams raise money. So it was a high school fundraising company, and I did that for like a year, but sport was still so in my blood, but I felt this pressure that I needed to go out and do something else. And there's some athletes that go on and they become coaches, I'm a great like I'm a very good coach. I coach in a lot of things. And I would say when it comes to coaching, I'm above average. Um, but I just felt like I should be leaving sport to go do something else because I didn't feel like I could necessarily create a career that I wanted to grow. So I struggled with that. But then I got back into sport and I got around some strength and conditioning coaches who were not in the US Olympic Committee, who had businesses. They had their own facilities. They had books and seminars and products to sell. And I was like, whoa, this is interesting. And so I moved to Las Vegas to train with one of these coaches. I remember this conversation. He looked at me, he goes, no, I had moved from Boston. I was living like on my savings, which wasn't much. And this coach, he said, he looked at me, he goes, you seem like a smart kid. Can you help me kind of grow this thing? And so at the time he was writing for these fitness magazines and he was making, I don't know, like he was making six figures a year writing for magazines and he had this online presence. And so I learned about the world of marketing and specifically information marketing. And I learned about, people who, because I was always fascinated about people who wrote books and, did that. And it's funny, the shelf behind me, like I have 8
Mm.
other shelves now, right? Like, and so I became fascinated in the world of people who had knowledge and they could then package their knowledge and sell it and things like that. So, but that also exposed me to the world of business. And so one of the things that I wish that I tell every athlete who listen is that your experience in your sport is going to give you tools to overcome challenges if you are aware of that is what's happening. And that's the big difference. Like if you are aware of what it is you're learning while you're competing, you are learning, yes, a certain set of skills, but more importantly, you're learning principles that you can apply anywhere. And I wasn't taught that. Um, when I retired, the U.S. Olympic Committee provided a service to retiring Olympians. Um, they had this massive company called Drake Beam and Morin, which is a multinational corporation, and they go into big companies when they lay off like thousands of people. And so I did a personality profile, which I had never done before. And I came out of that, and the guy said, "Well, you're actually like introverted," and I thought I was really extroverted. And he said, "No, no, here's why." And he explained it. I was like, "Oh my God, I wish I knew this like 15 years ago." And I do this with my athletes now. I put them through a personality assessment, and because if they struggle with certain things in their sport, this will tell me why. And when I learn about that and I teach them, now they're like free. It's crazy. So, but when I came out of that experience with Drake Beam and Morin when I was retiring, I met with a career counselor, and he told me I should go sell rings like for a like it was just ridiculous. I won't even get into it. But I'll tell you this, it was horrible. And so I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And I had a very limited knowledge of like what you can do with your life and how you can make money and how people make money. And, um, and so now I know that there's a million ways to make money but money pays for food and rent and kids and wives and, things like that. And I should say wives, plural, just wife, right? Like, um, yeah, I struggled with that for like, I want to say 10 years, 10 years or so. Um, but when I started learning marketing and I started learning about business in those ways, it just opened up this whole world to me. And so I would love for athletes to create a business that helps fund their lifestyle of sport. Because a lot of athletes will quit sport because they feel they need to go make money, like they maybe they're not funded. Like I stopped doing luge not because I was bad at it. I got myself back to a point where I was beating guys who were top 15 in the world, but I ran out of money. And I got tired of feeling like I was just kind of fighting all the time. But, you know, there's so many avenues from the world of sport that I think, athletes can become strength and conditioning coaches. They can go on and have a career maybe outside of their national team, and have that life, because the life of travel and the life that's hard. It's not conducive to a family. And so, but now with the internet, it's more possible for athletes to understand, to expose themselves to more possibility that I didn't have back then. And so when I talk to my athletes now, I go, listen, this sport thing you have right now, as much as you possibly can, invest yourself in it 100%. Because when you leave, when you finally decide that you're not going to compete anymore, you have to be comfortable with your decision and know that you're done. Because if you leave and then you think you still can go back and you're still, I think one of the worst things is when an athlete stops competing and then becomes a coach right away, and they're just on the sidelines of their sport going like, I'm better than all you guys. You're horrible, right? Like, I should be out there. Like, you want to just disconnect. So uh, yeah, I hope that helps, because it's not easy, but I think there's that saying, like, man who chases two rabbits loses both. But in the terms of athletes, what happens is the tension in the athlete's head is that if I keep going as an athlete, and I'm not going to be a Chris Hoy, right? Or I'm not going to be the elite and retire with money. Like, they're gonna be 25 years old or 30 years old and be starting from scratch. And now I can tell you, having had success and failure in business, that can happen to you at any point in your life. Like, we had to close our company in 2015 when oil went to 25 bucks a barrel, and we're in Oil City, and our company closed. So I had to start from scratch again. And so that idea that, you're going to start from scratch, it can happen whenever. But I think if your eyes are open and you understand that you're meeting people within your sport, you're learning things, you're learning just this idea of how to take a challenge and overcome it, that if you understand that, then you can make good transitions. But if you are just an athlete and you have blinders on, then you're gonna feel lost when you're done. It's gonna become such a part of you that you're only going to feel like if you have your sport, you're you, and if you don't have your sport, you're not you, and that's when people get into trouble mentally, right? So yeah, so that's one of my bits of advice for athletes in general. It's a tough balance, but um, there's more possibility than you think you have, I think, when you're done.
And in your current business, what are the services you're offering?
So now, one of the things that I've coached all the time, I've worked with athletes for years. So I started a website called athletespecific.com. And because one of the things that I find is that I talk to athletes very differently than their main technical coach would talk to them. And we touched on it a little bit here, is that a lot of athletes don't have somebody in their corner who's helping them manage their physical training, their relationship with their technical coach, the direction that they're taking as an athlete within their sport. Maybe they're feeling pressure that they have to go join another team or another club. We have this a lot in the United States. Like, if you're a good athlete, there's a ton of places that want you, right? And then if you're going like collegiately, what's a good experience for you? How do you balance the mental aspect of your game? Like, how are you marrying what you're learning from your competitive experience and marrying it with your practice experience? Like, so I wrote this book. I wrote An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, and which is a huge chunk of what I know as as a coach. I believe every coach should write a book, because what you really want to do is you want to go to your athlete and say, read this, then come back to me, right? Read this, let's get on the same page, and then let's go forward. So I started coaching and consulting with families and their athletes, and helping athletes understand everything it takes to be successful as an athlete. Because, as you know, when you are focusing on the technical aspect of your sport, that's where most athletes migrate to. It's the doing of your thing, whether you're juggling a soccer ball, riding a bike, swinging a tennis racket. Athletes like to do that. But the thing is, they believe more of that is the plan. And that's not true. You have to look at them physically and go, well, you need a strength and conditioning coach. You have no mobility in your hips. Yeah, you may be super talented, but this is going to catch up to you. Athletes tend to work in silos. And what I do is help an athlete marry that all together. And we work on the mental and the mindset side of things so that they have more confidence and they eliminate their anxiety and along those ways. And so, because I realized there's not really someone who serves that role for an athlete. They're either going to go find someone like you, or they're going to go find a sports psychologist and try to figure out why they're not thinking right, and so I come in kind of in the role as sports psychology, but I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm more just, self-made, hand taught, that sort of thing. But helping them understand where their shortcomings are. And families usually bring me in when they've invested a lot of money in their athlete, and their athlete has a big dream and they're doing all this stuff, but it's all in silos and it's just not coming together. And so they bring me on, and then we bring it all together. And then the athletes usually come out of it, 100% better, because now they have an understanding oh, I get it. I know why I don't feel confident on a race day, because I really, physically I'm not up to speed, or they go my coach wants me to execute this particular skill, but now I realize that my coach doesn't understand that physically I'm not capable of doing that. So we steer them in the right direction there. I work with athletes for about 8 to 10 weeks. We get on the phone once a week. I have video modules in a membership site that they have access to, and over 10 weeks we take an athlete from typically not very confident and full of anxiety or things like that, and getting them to an area where they are confident. And then it all comes together. And then usually their coaches will end up contacting me going what'd you do to my athlete? They're completely a different kid. And I'm who else you got? Because that's the unfortunate thing about sport, is that we tend to work in silos, right? You get the athlete for a little while, you're working on strength, but you're working on their conditioning, you're working on their physical mobility, but we don't always make the connection between now you should be able to execute that skill, right? Now you should be able to reach that level. And so that's where I come into play. And so I do that. I've got a Facebook group. If people go to athletespecific.com, in the upper menu bar, there's a webinar. If people want to learn more about the program, they can watch the webinar, but there's also a link. It's just this private group, and that'll take you to our Facebook group. And that's a small group that's growing. But yeah, all day, every day, I talk to athletes or talk to people like you, and because we're just trying to make athletes better, and because we do believe, I think, Christian, at our core, we believe that the benefits of sport, of being part of it, and not just having a successful experience, but dealing with the negative and the setbacks. We all believe that the experience in sport should make an athlete more resilient in the rest of their life, right? And we want that to happen. We want them to go through as far as they can go, so that when they leave, they can leave and they go, I gave it my best and I'm happy, and now I'm transitioning. And that's where our love of all this comes from, is we want that underdog to win. We want those kids to win. We want to just grow sport in general. And because the benefits should outweigh all of the negatives, if it's done correctly. So that's my belief.
Really cool. So where can people find you? Athletespecific.com?
Yeah, athletespecific.com is my main website. And then for the purpose of this audience, that's probably the best place to find me. And what I would suggest is go, there's the webinar. There's also, I created a little download for athletes about how to deal with negative thoughts, right? One of the things that I've uncovered is that there's a lot of talk about how you shouldn't have a negative thought, right? But what happens to an athlete when they're in the starting line, or they're ready to take the field, is a negative, some sort of self-doubt pops in, or and then they think oh, wait a second, they don't necessarily know how to deal with that. And so the PDF that I put together is just some tricks on how to deal with some of those negative thoughts. And because the important thing is to know that they are going to come. But you have a choice with what you do with that thought. It's not you. It's just the thought. But most athletes take it, it's like, oh, wait a second, I'm thinking negative, and then they just get all derailed. And so it's the ANT download again on the upper menu bar at athletespecific.com. And then the book is on Amazon, An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life. Super proud of it. It's a real book. It's durable. It can sit in your gym bag. But it can be read in parts. It can be read in pieces so that if an athlete's struggling with one certain thing, they can go into the book and they can read that as well. So, and then if anybody wants to email, they can email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. So happy to hear from anybody, hear from people all over the world, it's exciting, right? It's good fun.
It's truly exciting. Jonathan, thanks a lot for your time and the insights.
It was a pleasure, Christian. I appreciate it. And I hope people who are listening can benefit and keep, subscribing to your podcast, because you've got a lot of great people on there. And it doesn't matter what level an athlete is at, they should be listening to these types of conversations, and not waiting, so it's a pleasure speaking with you, and your English is amazing. Way better than my Dutch, so it's all good.
Well, I'm German originally.
Oh,
I'm working in the Netherlands. So.
Oh my God, it's just a wrinkle after. So then you should be fine with the German talking a hackle. You'll be all right.
That is true, but most of the conversations are in English, so I would have to translate it then.
That's awesome. That always floors me in North America, where we only speak English. We try to speak other languages, but it's always a struggle. Whereas everybody everywhere else speaks their native tongue and English, and usually something else. So just a pleasure.